Welcome back. We are diving straight into a submitted video transcript from the channel The Storybox.
Yeah.
And this one is a really passionate challenge to Candace Owens and some others for their foreign policy stance on the protests in Iran.
Right away, the passion is it's palpable. And you have to give them credit. They're hitting on an absolutely critical, high-stakes foreign policy debate.
Totally. They're identifying the core dilemma, which is this genuine, documented suffering of the Iranian.
You see reports of, 20,000 killed, this imminent execution of a 26-year-old protester?
And they put that right up against the polarizing question of U.S. intervention.
The material also makes a really strong initial case for why the Iraq War syndrome analogy might be, a bit broken or outdated now.
It's tracking complex counter-arguments. It's not just an emotional reaction.
Mm-hmm.
They're using analysis from people like Ben Shapiro about, targeted air power options.
Options designed just to deter the IRGC from murdering people, not an occupation.
Exactly. So that integration of different policy options is a real strength. It shows the writers done their homework.
It is. It's high-level analysis, but, and this is a big but, the vehicle carrying that analysis needs a total overhaul.
Yeah, if the goal is to persuade or inform.
The execution is actively, I think, undercutting the seriousness of the topic.
So the creator's mission seems to be holding commentators accountable for what they see as harmful policies.
A huge task.
And to do that, we have to start with our first point, the tone and credibility, and specifically the overwhelming presence of ad hominem attacks.
The weakness here is just the stunning disconnect. On one hand, you have the gravity of the subject matter. We're talking oppression, death, geopolitics.
Serious stuff.
And on the other, you have the language being used to discuss it. The extreme reliance on these really personal, aggressive, and often profane insults. It just completely undermines the argument.
I mean, when the speaker uses terms like demonic psychopathic witch, narcissist, or dingbat directed at Candace Owens, the listener's reaction just shifts.
It does.
So when you finally get to the point and say, Owens is not a serious person, that claim has zero credibility.
Because the speaker has been using rhetoric that is, frankly, far more aggressive than the critique itself demands.
Right. I wonder, though, is there an argument to be made that for this specific audience, an audience that's already polarized, that the aggression is the whole point?
That's a fair question. Maybe the goal isn't persuasion. Maybe it's activation.
But if the goal is activation, then why include all the detailed policy analysis? You cite the suffering of 20,000 people. That's a human rights issue that should transcend, niche political squabbles.
It makes you wonder. The aggression doesn't just activate.
No, it triggers this cognitive dissonance in anyone who's even slightly skeptical. It makes them defensive.
And they start focusing on your aggression, not the evidence you're presenting about Iran.
You force the listener to just stop engaging with the facts, like the claim that the protests are fake and gay or some kind of Israeli operation.
That's the risk. The goal is supposed to be holding her accountable for her policy views, not her character. So if the argument is about a policy that leads to innocent people dying, you have to elevate your tone to match that.
So the suggestion, then, is pretty clear.
Reframe the whole thing.
Yet reframe the critique to be exclusively about the factual or logical fallacies in her claim. Take that passion, which is a great raw material,
And channel it.
Channel it into a robust, almost clinical refutation.
Let's get concrete. You have to eliminate all the personal attacks. The stuff about her marriage, past controversies, the line about she married into privilege.
It's wasted energy.
Totally wasted. Instead, use that volume to challenge her foreign policy analysis. Directly, calmly, refute the idea that spreading democracy is always just military code for dropping bombs and stealing stuff.
And you already have the best tool for that right there in the script.
The non-occupation options.
Exactly. You cite Ben Shapiro's analysis of targeted air power to deter the IRGC from murdering people in the streets. That is a powerful, factual, surgical counterpoint.
It is.
So let that specific, policy-driven evidence be your weapon, not insults.
When you use policy to refute policy, your credibility as a critic is instantly established. When you use insults, you just become part of the noise you're trying to critique.
All right, so even if we fix the tone, we still have this major issue with focus. It keeps the piece from being the authoritative critique it's trying to be.
Which brings us to our second point, completeness and focus. Or really, the problem of tangential narrative drift.
The material central, urgent focus on Iran and U.S. policy, it gets so severely diluted.
By these long, complex, and seemingly unconnected side stories. It's a classic case of what you might call scope creep.
After dedicating real time to the severity of the situation in Iran, the executions, the death toll, the speaker just introduces this massive tangent.
On Owens smearing Charlie Kirk's good name.
But it's the next bit that is it's an editorial collapse. This long discussion about a Turning Point USA board member, Paul Valery.
Oh, right. The psychological operations, the avowed Satanist, and the accusations of a church trafficking children from Romania.
I actually had to pause it and check the title. Did they really dedicate that much airtime to trafficking and a Satan church in a video about U.S. policy in Iran?
They did. And these detours just confuse the entire purpose.
The audience is just left asking, what is this? Is it a geopolitical analysis or an exposé on some niche internal conservative infighting?
And the urgency around the Iranian protesters just vanishes when you pivot to claims about a board member's religious practices.
The weakness here is that the writer completely loses the high ground. The sheer moral weight of the Iranian crisis is supposed to be the engine of the piece.
But it ends up being treated like B-roll for these other political dramas.
If your goal is to critique her policy on Iran, then any discussion about her integrity has to link directly back to her ability to analyze foreign affairs.
Not just to prove she keeps bad company.
The suggestion here is simple, if maybe a little painful.
Ruthless editing.
Ruthless editing. You have to isolate the primary subject. If those secondary controversies are absolutely essential, and that's a big if.
Then they need to be segmented clearly, briefly, and you have to establish the connection to the main thesis in the very first sentence.
So for a concrete example, that whole segment about Paul Valery, the Satan Church, and trafficking,
it has to go. Cut it entirely.
There is no way to link that back to her isolationist stance on Iran without introducing another, huge unsupported conspiracy.
And if the intent is just to show her brain rot, to use the speaker's term.
Right, their term.
Then a tangent on her stupid dreams should be a 10-second reference, not a whole segment.
You have to commit to the policy critique. That argument, the one that the Iraq war syndrome is broken and that military options are different now, that's a robust, factual argument.
Spend your time there. Don't go chasing ghosts and conservative media drama.
Yeah.
Because when you let the side stuff steal the spotlight, you're telling your audience that the main issue, the oppression and death in Iran, is actually less important than the internal politics of Turning Point USA. You just diminish your own argument.
So we've talked about the tone, and we've talked about the focus. Now we need to look at the structural integrity of the final argument itself.
Right. The material builds up all this intensity, but when it reaches its most important conclusion, the foundation just isn't there to support it.
Which leads us to our third point, argumentative strategy, and asserting a conclusion without sufficient proof.
The core weakness here is that the ultimate conclusion, that Owens is a provocative plant to piss off everyone, it's asserted purely through personal conviction.
Yeah.
It just lacks the logical foundation that should have been built by the evidence presented.
The speaker introduces this really high-stakes theory that she's a provocateur and a plant very late in the piece.
And the basis for it is almost entirely emotional belief.
You hear things like, I'm truly convinced, or I'm fully, adamant about it.
Which is fascinating, but belief isn't evidence in a critique. You can't just, slap this huge, unsubstantiated conspiracy theory on top of the structure when you haven't finished laying the foundation.
Especially because the speaker jumps so rapidly between Iran and Charlie Kirk and the satanic church stuff.
The audience isn't giving that coherent linear argument they need to even begin to accept a provocative plant conclusion.
If the goal is to completely discredit her, then the writer has to spend serious time logically establishing how her specific policy positions.
Like saying Iran is fake or about a land grab.
Exactly. How do those things serve the provocateur agenda? How does discouraging U.S. intervention against the IRGC benefit some hypothetical agenda to piss everyone off?
That link is critical, and it's completely missing.
And what about counter-arguments to that claim? When you close with an unsubstantiated conspiracy theory, you risk alienating the part of your audience who might have been with you on the policy critique,
but who draw the line at accusations of being a paid plant.
So the suggestion is to either build that necessary logical structure, which is incredibly difficult,
or, and this is probably the better option, adopt a more achievable and persuasive closing argument that relies on the facts you already.
And the speaker provided a much stronger hook, that ideological inconsistency.
Absolutely. They already make this compelling claim that her isolationism contradicts the stated Christian value of helping the oppressed.
Which is a values-based critique that hits so much harder and requires zero conspiracy theory.
So instead of the plant theory, the speaker could frame their final moments around policy and value. Ask a rhetorical question.
Something like, does this isolationist policy, which means letting the Iranian people suffer, truly help the American people? Or does it just serve as a distraction from clear, stated Christian values of justice and aid to the oppressed?
You could use the speaker's own claim that the Bible does talk about helping the oppressed to build a powerful, values-based closing argument.
It's persuasive, it doesn't need any extra substantiation, and it lands so much harder emotionally.
Because it attacks an internal contradiction. It shows how the policy betrays the stated values. That's a massive upgrade from just saying, I'm convinced.
So we've covered some really critical ground today. It's all aimed at taking the passion and the research that's clearly in this script and giving it the structure it deserves.
The expertise is there, no question, but the execution just needs that sharp focus. We identified 3 major areas that, once they're addressed, will transform this piece.
First, manage the tone to gain credibility. You've got to eliminate the personal insults, the ad hominem attacks,
and channel that passion into challenging the logical and factual fallacies of the policy, using the evidence you already have.
like the targeted air power option.
Second, focus the narrative. You have to commit to the Iranian crisis as the absolute center of the piece.
Which means ruthlessly editing out or at least severely shortening those distracting tangents about Charlie Kirk and the Turning Point board member.
That internal political stuff just undermines the urgency of the foreign policy discussion.
And finally, structure that central argument so the conclusion, whatever it is logically supported by the evidence you presented.
The evidence of suffering and the counter-arguments for intervention have to build toward a conclusion that's persuasive, not just asserted.
Take these suggestions, apply that energy and expertise you already have, and send the revised work back to us.
We really look forward to seeing the refinement.
Until next time.